now. I'm also a trainer of NLP and a trainer of hypnotherapy. I have specialized over the years in a number of different things, including stop smoking and weight loss. Currently, I'm doing a lot with anxiety and panic attacks and trauma. And that's where I am at the moment. Often mentoring people and going around the world training. So that'll be me.
Thank you.
And posting on Facebook.
Yes, that's your second profession.
How's
Right?
your day?
All right, Kaz.
Getting warm right here.
Yeah.
She's pretty neutral, huh?
Everybody
is
can mute
awesome.
themselves, please, besides the spotlighters. That would be great.
Right? It's freezing cold 10 feet that way.
Okay.
No,
You can actually mute everybody. If you go to the meeting, you can actually just mute everybody, and then
I have to unmute you guys. So are you
okay.
ready? I'm going to mute everybody, but just keep an eye on your own thing.
Okay. So
Hands off.
there we go. Okay.
Every time you were clicking, I was clicking unmute.
There we go. You see, we're in sync. We're in sync.
Yes.
So we're okay. Yeah. So my name's Kaz Rileiy. I'm based over in the UK. I'm a hypnotherapist. I have a full-time hypnotherapy practice. I also teach. My niche is sexuality, sexual freedom. I'm the author of the book Woman, which you can see behind me. And I'm very passionate about helping people get really comfortable with sex, basically. So, and all the things that stop them from doing that. So there's a whole host of things that covers. So that is me in a little nutshell.
Thank you. I hope we let you out of the nutshell pretty soon. Stephanie, I'd love to hear from you next.
Okay, I'm Stephanie Conkle. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I've had a full-time hypnotherapy practice since 2008. I'm probably best known for the profound somnambulism protocol with direct voice hypnosis. I really do everything, but I guess I specialize in anxiety, trauma, PTSD. Those are my favorite issues to work with, but yeah, I work with anything really. And I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. And Evan, love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm Evan Baumgardner. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and full-time hypnotherapist. I specialize in anxiety, midlife adjustments, and Bell's palsy.
Fantastic. And so for anybody who's kind of new here or just isn't familiar with the setup or doesn't receive the emails because you're not on my email list, so therefore you're not in the know yet, so get on that. The structure of this is just sort of a casual roundtable where we have questions that have come in from the members that are sometimes directed to a specific person in the squad and sometimes directed to anyone. And I do prefer to get those questions in advance. However, at the very end, if there's time, we will do a live Q&A for anybody who didn't get a chance to pop their questions in. So are we ready for the first question, guys?
Yeah.
This one actually goes to Barry and Evan.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, specifically, that was what was requested. So let me get to it.
Oh my.
And of course, my tech issues are starting back up again. I have it all in front of me and I'm not accessing it. I don't know why it's suddenly not showing up. How strange. Okay. What options does one have as a hypnotherapist if both regression to cause and the ADOC model are not working on the client that suffers from zoophobia? This is for Barry and Evan.
Whoa.
Yet the client claims to have a great sense of love for animals, just freaks out in proximity to them. So let's start with Evan and then we'll go to Barry. Do you want me to read that again?
Yeah, please. I would, if you would.
Okay. What options does one have as a hypnotherapist if both regression to cause and the ADOC model do not work for a client that suffers from zoophobia, fear of animals? Yet the client claims to have a great sense of love and compassion for animals. They just freak out when they're in proximity to them.
Sure. Evan, you want to go first? Or?
Sure. Let's see. Number of things. I mean, I think I would start with clearing out just any sort of emotions. I'm trying to remember the exact protocol I did with the last animal phobia client I had. But I definitely didn't do regression. I don't think that that's necessary in a lot of cases. Desensitization, I think the control method would work great with that as well, where we're just letting the subconscious make those changes, going, hey, this is interfering. Why is it? And establishing that there's no need for it.
Cool. Thank you. And at any point, if it's not something that any of you have worked with, you can just say, you know what, I haven't really worked with that. Here's maybe what I would do, just like, Evan did.
I
just
want
don't
to go back to my notes
spot,
now and look what I did.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Like sometimes people are going to ask a question if you're like, well, I don't know what I would do because I haven't experienced that. Just sort of like tell us what you think you might do or what has worked or whatever. It's fine. Very casual roundtable. So thank you though. Barry.
Well, there's numerous options. But if you boil it down, which one of the things I like to do is trying to simplify things, because you can overcomplicate things with techniques. If someone's got a phobia, first of all, you want to find out, is it a true phobia? Most of the time people will come to see you, they haven't got a true phobia. What they have is some form of anticipatory fear. If they have a true phobia, so for example, they see an animal and immediately freak out, there's no hesitation, there's no talking to themselves. So it's literally what's called a VK synesthesia. Then something like the NLP fast phobia model will work really, really well. However, the NLP fast phobia model only works with VK synesthesias. Unfortunately, a lot of people use it, think, well, it works really well for this, I'll use it for everything. Doesn't work for that. It's for particularly, it was originally called the VK dissociation model, and it's visual kinesthetic synesthesia. If it's anything else, then again, I want to try and break it down into the structure. And you've got, at the underlying structure, you've got when X, client feels or does Y. There's some trigger that is triggering them to feel bad. So one of my way of thinking is that most problems that are coming into your office are pretty much a variation of the same thing. They're going to be some variation of when X, client does or feels Y. And so what I want to do is find out what is the specific trigger. So first of all, find the context, find the trigger. What is the specific trigger? Is it something they're seeing? Is it something they're saying to themselves? Because typically be one of those two things. The other senses, such as the sense of taste or smell, typically are not going to be too much of a problem for most people. So it's typically a visual trigger, an auditory trigger. That could be visual external or visual internal, or auditory external or auditory internal, in other words, self-talk, and then they're going to feel bad. So it's basically when X, client feels Y. The solution is for them to feel anything other than Y. So what you want to do is to find out how they want to feel in that situation. How would you like to be in that situation that's different from how you've been? And they might say, I want to be confident, I want to be excited, or whatever. Find out what that is, elicit that in them, anchor it, and then bring them back to the trigger, and keep bringing them back to the trigger until the trigger triggers the new response rather than the old response. If you do that over and over again, it will work. So I'm not quite sure where the acronym ADAC came from, but it originally is the meta pattern of NLP. And if you follow that structure and you do it well, it will work. Most times when it doesn't work is because you haven't, first of all, associated them to the problem. You have to get that neural network lit up first. This is one of my big problems with scripts. People come in and say, I've got a phobia. Great, sit down, pull out the book, do a progressive muscle relaxation exercise. The person's really relaxed. The last thing they are doing is associated to the problem at that point. You read them a nice little script. They feel great at the end of session, but you haven't changed anything. You've just given them a little mental massage. So you have to associate them first. You have to trigger that in the neurology so that at that point, protein synthesis starts to occur in the brain and things start to be able to be changed. You have to do that step first. If you don't do it, nothing's going to work.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, and I just checked what I did with my last phobia. And I did forward projection, associating them into that probable future scenario, and then before that, doing mindfulness just so they could get in touch with their body, how it would feel in that situation, doing some hypnotic desensitization exercises where they're calming themselves in that. And then I did a session where I used TPM, Freddie Jacquin's SNAP protocol, and got good success with that.
Fantastic.
They're associating themselves into the situation in the assessment phase when they're telling you their story. So you can always just hijack that part of the session and roll with it. You don't have to wait for the relaxation and all that crap.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. Okay, this one's for Kaz. This is actually a client of mine that I would like to ask your help with, since I have you in the spotlight here. So it's a young man. He's in his mid-20s. Really handsome, outgoing, charismatic, super nice guy, terrified of sex. He had a bad situation in high school. It was his one and only situation, and he's just absolutely terrified of it. And so even though he has opportunities to date, he sabotages them because he is just so reluctant and afraid of what happens when they get to the point where sex is on the table. So what would you suggest for him?
Well, there's lots that you can do, but I always go back to this kind of what first of all, find out what is this experience was that he had through, a long consultation.
It had to do with not getting a full erection or not keeping it, and then the girl, because she's a high school age girl, teasing him about it and taking it personally.
Okay, so I take people through what I call the trance kind of framework when I'm working with all kind of sexual dysfunction. So the first part is the T, which is the teach and educate. So I would explain to him consciously, this is a really common thing that happens to lots of guys, that, most men at some point in their lifetime will lose their erection for one reason or another. I don't think there's a guy on the planet that hasn't happened to at some point. That it was unfortunate that he got that reaction, but it was because that they were in high school, and that's just how these things are. And kind of moving forwards is, there's lots of great kind of things that are waiting there for him. So to do that, we have to then address any shame and guilt, because most people have shame around sex, and also he may have shame around that experience. I would then transform that first experience, because that's his one and only experience. So I normally use something like Drake Eastburn's protocol to go and reframe that particular experience. So we're looking about how he felt rather than the experience itself. So we can often take back the future self that's got past all of this stuff, go and have a chat with the younger self. So we're using that as a resource and just kind of coaching almost. So it's kind of sex ed in the past, if you like, so that particular trauma has been transformed. And then we move forwards with communication, connection, normalizing sexual function, which this is normal for most men at some point in their lifetime. And then future pace him into a good experience. And then I would look at, if he's had that for a long time, I mean, you say he's only in his 20s, it may be then that he's got a lot of fear around actually dating. So then I would maybe look at that fear. But we have to deal with, one, making sure he's got the right information. One of the biggest things with most sexual problems, we talk about, like we were just talking about phobias, people fixing a glitch in the program. When it comes to sex stuff, more often than not, people are just running the wrong program. It's not a glitch in the program. They've just got the wrong information, which is why more and more I seem to be doing sex ed within and working with the inner child or the younger self. We're actually going back and giving the right information to the younger self, and then bringing that through all these different experiences with the, had you had that information, it probably would have been a very different experience. So that's probably where I would start. But the shame is always a key part. The misinformation is always a key part. And then kind of associating into a future positive experience, but making sure that's realistic, because quite often, especially at that age group, their expectations have been set by what they've been watching, which actually isn't real sex. It's usually pornography. So we need to make sure that
I think there's like some evangelical stuff in his background too.
Yeah, which is where a lot of the shame stuff comes from as well. So that would be the key points that I would look at. But obviously, exactly what I would do would depend exactly on how he was responding to each of those parts.
I haven't actually had the session with him yet, so we'll see. I was a little hesitant to take it on, honestly. So thank you. I feel a little bit more confident now. So this one is to anybody, and I'm going to address it to Stephanie first, because I'm really curious to hear your response to this. But it is, when we're only using idiomotor signals to ask the subconscious to do something for the client, what does the client think is actually happening in the brain? Which I know is going to be somewhat different from client to client, but like, how are you framing it? Do you believe, or do the clients believe that their subconscious mind is actually physically doing something? And this is from Sharon. And she is raising her hand because apparently she wants to add to that. So
yeah, it's something a little different. It's not so much what does the client think, what do we think is neurologically happening in the brain? Because it's easy to tell we're working with a meta pattern. But when we just use idiomotor signals and say, okay, the subconscious mind has just done it, what do we think is really happening?
So what I think is happening is a part of the person. You can think of it as a personality part or an ego state that is not so much connected fully to the main consciousness, right? Or the main personality is sort of just taking over, right? Of course, the subconscious mind is making these responses at the unconscious level, which happens all the time. So what do we think is happening when we're breathing without telling ourselves to breathe, right? So we have these subconscious responses, and these are a lot of times they're autonomic, but people think that just because it's an autonomic response that it's just chemicals in the brain firing off. But there is an actual process going on. There is an intelligence, a wisdom deep below that is happening at the unconscious level. And that's what's so cool about us as hypnotists, that we can call upon this wise, intelligent part that's deeply hidden to come up and sort of take over. And I see them as a personality. I don't see it as just like chemicals like firing off. I see it as there are decisions being made and there's a process going on. It's just a process happening at the level below conscious awareness. Does that make sense?
Would any of the other squad like to respond to that or add your 2 cents?
Okay, so I mean, for me, I look at it in I guess a slightly different way, in that I think there's a few things happening. We talk about an IMR, which is obviously an idiomotor response, which is an idea, a movement in response to that. And I think the reason in terms of what I think is happening or why they work is usually because I've primed it to. So I've normally set up an IMR. So when I've set up an IMR, I've explained to the client, your response, we've kind of conditioned that or put that in there. So you'll do this for yes, this for no. And sometimes we might use a maybe. I try and avoid maybes. And this is why I tend now, sometimes I use an IMR. It's interesting because I have quite a few clients where we'll say, this is your yes, this is your no. And we program that in, but then often it will kind of manifest in a foot or an elbow, but it's basically a movement. So what we're saying is you'll move one way for one response and one way for the other. So I think partly it's client expectation. And partly, it's also, we get this kind of response because we've had this idea, movement, response, just as sometimes we have, we have an idea in response to a movement or something that we see. So it's this kind of one way and then the other way. But essentially it's because I think I've told the client that's what's going to happen.
Well, sure. We've definitely conditioned them, or we've let them know that this is what's supposed to happen. We're setting expectations, which is step number one for all the hypnosis, right? And so that the subconscious has a clear idea of what we're doing and how it expects us to communicate with it and it back to us. I still feel like there's almost a split from the personality with it. Just from because of the way that I work, I don't even work with ideomotor responses anymore. I talk directly to the subconscious and it talks back to me most of the time without the client's conscious awareness of that happening. So that's where I'm coming from, just with my own experience.
Yeah. I guess that's slightly different to an IMR though, isn't it? Because I know that I do that. You can have a full-on conversation and the client remembers absolutely nothing about it. And it'll start the subconscious, if that's what it is, will speak in the third person and all kinds of stuff, definitely. But I guess that's different to a yes and a no, because it's often much more detailed than yes and no, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then also you have to be, it's hard to be sure if the ideomotor response is coming from the conscious mind or the subconscious mind, unless you can get a fuller verbal communication, or unless those ideomotor responses just look so beautiful because they're just so jerky or so subtle that it's obvious that the client isn't consciously controlling it. But sometimes we have no way of knowing. Sometimes like that finger will just go like, it'll just move up like that. And then you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like a typical ideomotor response, but everyone's brain is different. That could be a completely legitimate ideomotor response just because they didn't go like that and they went like that. But you don't really have a way of knowing unless you're doing other types of testing with it to make sure that they're in proper somnambulism at that level. Or of course, if you do the direct voice like I do.
And Barry, I don't think you really use the deeper somnambulistic trance states, right? You use the
no. I'm sitting here thinking, oh dear, I'm going to be going against the tide as usual.
This is why we have you on here.
Well, here's the thing, and I will start this by first of all saying I used to do things like that. I used to use ideomotor signals. I don't anymore. Not because it doesn't work, but because I think it's confusing, and I don't think it works because of the reasons we've all believed that they work. And one of the reasons is some years back, about 2015, something like that, I saw a lecture by Professor Irvin Kirsch. I would hope that most people know who Irvin Kirsch is if they're in the hypnosis world. He's done a heck of a lot of research into hypnosis and what hypnosis really is and what it isn't. And he did quite a bit of research on ideomotor signals, and he found that it didn't work because of the ways that we think, that it isn't communicating with the unconscious mind, that oftentimes it's just wishful thinking or priming, which is sort of what Kaz was getting to, is priming these responses, but you're not communicating with an unconscious mind. And the reason behind that is because the unconscious mind is merely a metaphor. We have one brain. And so I don't think that when we're using ideomotor signals, we are communicating with an unconscious mind or a different personality or anything. We're talking to that person. And I think you have to be very, very careful when you start talking about parts. Again, this is not something that not a lot of people are aware of, but some years ago, and I've got this book to hand, not because I was primed for this, because it's right here on my bookshelf. And I highly recommend anyone who does any type of age regression or parts work reads this book called Making Monsters by Richard Offshire. And it will make you think twice about what you're doing. Because first of all, Richard Offshire is the guy, one of the guys, along with Elizabeth Loftus, who looked into false memory syndrome back in the 80s and 90s, and how clients can be easily led just by changing one word in a question. You can change what's going on in the person. But he also looks into what was big again in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which was multiple personality disorder. Now, here's an interesting thing. According to this guy, and he's one of the top researchers in the field, he never found a single case of multiple personality disorder that existed before the client went into therapy. I'm pausing for effect there. Not one. Never found any incidents of multiple personality disorder.
Well, we know that there have been incidents of that from children as young as like 3 years old who had never been in therapy before.
No. Not according to the research. There may be anecdotal, but not according to the research.
Okay. Well, you just said not one, and I can think of one. So that's all. I was just throwing that
according
in.
to the research.
Whether it's anecdotal or not. Okay.
Yeah. But certainly according to the research that's in the book.
Okay.
And he shows that he's got transcripts of some of these therapy sessions, and the therapists, the well-meaning therapists, are doing parts work and creating sub-personalities. And if the person, for lack of a better term, is not tightly packed, that can get out of control.
I agree. I agree with that. And I agree with the fact that you can create false memories if you do regression the wrong way, if you're not properly trained in regression.
So
also,
I think you have to be very, very careful with things like that, because even if you talk about conscious and unconscious, you are creating a potential problem that a person can use as an excuse. That's not me, that's my unconscious.
Right.
And
well, and I do think
the reality is we've got one brain.
Well, we have three brains actually.
Well, no, but it's from the point of view, so we've got one mind and it's conscious.
Right. I mean, I do agree with the unconscious being a metaphor.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that.
It's not like this little man or woman sitting in there, like if you like remember there was a film a few years ago with these little people inside the girl's head. A lot of times we think it like it isn't. It's just one brain.
One brain, but many minds. I think we have the mind and the brain needs to be looked at as different.
Well,
you have multiple ego states. It doesn't mean that everybody has and what you're saying, multiple personality disorder is now called dissociative identity disorder. That's why it got so rare.
Name.
That's
but
so
that's why
rare.
it changed name. You know why it changed name? Because of all the problems.
Let Stephanie finish. What were you going to say?
No, I was just saying that's so rare. And with the 15 years that I've been working with parts therapy, I've never had anyone who has had dissociative identity disorder come from it. I believe that it can happen if the therapist is not well trained, or if the client is already in a state of like high neurosis to begin with, that we shouldn't even be working with them.
Right. The not tightly packed that Barry was.
However, I would question the thing about whether the how well trained they are, because Offshore is looking at PhDs who are doing this. So they're extremely well trained.
That doesn't mean anything to me. I've worked with so many PhDs who don't know how to tie their shoe.
Knowledgeable and being skillful are not the same thing.
That means
okay, next question.
This is one of the problems sometimes with research is that we get people that do a lot of research and not actually an awful lot of clinical practice. And we do have to take both of those things into account. And this is when you look at a lot of hypnosis research right across the board, and I don't mean this particular research, but right across the board, then, it's very hard to have randomized double-blind controlled trials, because one of the things, it's a very false situation. So I know of people, that have been involved in hypnosis clinical trials who even thought to be, somebody that wouldn't respond to hypnosis, who have then later come into my office and have done some work and been absolutely fine. And the reason is because it's about the purpose of it. So it just depends. And I think, with any technique, within any profession, there's always a downside, but the majority of people that have, when we use parts therapy, is actually about integrating people rather than dissociating.
100%.
And that's the big issue, is that so many of the parts therapies create more dissociation rather than less. And it should be at the end of a session really integrating, because you want to get wholeness. So even whatever, you want to get wholeness at the end of the session.
I'm also careful not to do a parts party where we're calling out multiple parts. Just one or two parts. We work with that. We integrate those.
And one of the reasons why I like the technique called core transformation that Connie Ray Andreas came up with is because at the end it integrates it completely, so that the core state, i.e. love or next connection with God or whatever, it's no longer the part, it's that feeling. The love is, and that's what I like about that. But my issue with some of these techniques is they overcomplicate it.
Yeah,
And make it
I
too
agree with that.
complex. When change work
It
really
both
is
ways too,
simple.
though. I think some people oversimplify. So
Well, you can, but if you're paying attention, and the reality is most people's problems are a version of when X-client does Y. There, some context makes them feel bad. Just get them to feel good and bring it into that thing. Sometimes getting these complex things can be an issue. It can create a great placebo response. You know, if you come up with great metaphor and you get great experience, that can be a fantastic placebo response.
which is equally as valid. You know?
Yeah, but if you recognize that that's what it is, that you're creating the placebo. It's like if you ever had a client who's fallen asleep during the session. Now, again, we could argue on this about the unconscious mind is always paying attention. But from the point of view of memory research, everything stops when you fall asleep. You don't take any more information. But if the client then at the end of the session wakes up, and if you look them straight in the eye, really confident and said, you're a fantastic hypnosis subject, you are going to stop smoking now, whatever, and you then hit more suggestions, because they've had the experience of falling asleep, that will be a convincer for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a massive placebo for some people. So some of these techniques, I think they overcomplicate things that you don't need to do that.
Next question. Is there anybody of the four of you that doesn't spend a lot of time marketing on social media? Because this next question has to do with that. Basically, this person is just, how do you have a thriving practice without having to market on social media, promote yourself? Okay, Kaz.
Okay, so you might see my training stuff on social media, but there's not an awful lot. There's not an awful lot on social media about my therapy stuff. And I think, well, it depends where you want your client base to come from. So certainly when I set up my practice, early 2000s, late 1990s, there wasn't any social media. So I had to create a practice without using any of that. And, you know, it's back to people by people. So I've always been very active in my communities, and I've always, and anybody that comes and trains with me now will know, I always say you don't sell hypnosis, you sell solutions to issues. People are looking for their, they go and they become experts on their issue, not the solution to it. It just so happens that they might happen across us and realize that we may be a solution to their problem. So that's one of the biggest things. A website is important, I believe. I still get masses of clients via my website. I still build my own. You know, you can get somebody else to do it for you, but you can build a very simple website that's very effective very quickly. But I always say, you know, we have to get out there. You know, I did all sorts of things. I was governor at one of my schools. I was in a board of governors. I've gone out. I do a lot of free talks. I target my talk to my group. So I don't go out and talk about hypnosis. I might go to the Lions or the Round Table, talk about erectile dysfunction. I did one recently where I actually talk about how, for men, about menopausal women and how that they can help. They'd all got wives that were kind of in that phase of life. I go to the WI, talk about lack of libido, and I do lots of talks about anxiety. So you can, you know, do all of these things within your local area fairly easily. And if you go and do that with the intention to serve, then people buy into you, and then they will come and use your services. And that's pretty much how I started out. And
so for you, is the promoting of the hypnosis is more incidental, not integral? Like
no, because, you know, I can talk about the thing that's meaningful to them, their issue, and then I can talk about how hypnosis can address that issue. So the hook that what they're interested in, and hypnosis, sometimes it's interesting to just go and talk about hypnosis, but I've always done it this way, and I've always had a busy practice. We're heading into a third recession. I've survived one and COVID, and this is the approach that I took. Is people want to know, one, that you're kind of getting where they're coming from, their issue, you're understanding their issue, and then we can promote a solution to help them. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I'm a hypnotist now, I'm going to go out and sell hypnosis, when actually what we do is we provide solutions to people. Exactly. And that to me is the key. And also just being out there in quite a positive way. So the social, people say to me, Kaz, you're all over the internet. Actually, I use YouTube and I use Facebook. I don't really use anything else. I am trying to do more blah, 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 because I think I should. But if you look at my actual Facebook, the majority of it is just positive stuff. And I think it's people get to know you because they, sorry, my Facebook, people get to know you. And even if you look at my YouTube, it's talking about issues. It's not just talking about hypnosis, because people are searching for their issue. So
I think people can in the industry can also get a little narrow-minded beyond that and think that their particular type of hypnosis is the thing that they should be selling, when I need to say, like, that's not it. I mean, I teach quantum journeys hypnosis, but I'm not going to tell people to just go out and only try and like promote that, because there's this whole wide range of skills.
My clients have no idea what profound somnambulism is, so I never put that in my promotions. I use it as a tool. Your website, I'm not, I want to just reiterate that I do pretty much the same as Kaz in my local community, except that I'm more introverted than Kaz. So I probably don't get out as much as she does. But your website, like, I bring all of my clients in through my web, almost all. I would say 90% of my clients I would say about 80% come through my website, and then the rest come through word of mouth. But your website has got to be professional. It has to be easy to understand. It has to be easy for them to pick up the phone and call you or make a phone appointment with you or whatever. And it's got to be SEO'd. It's got to be at the top of Google as much as possible for when someone types in hypnosis in your area.
Do you put much into the SEO and into
I do. In my website, that's how most people find me. As far as social media goes, I'm only marketing to other hypnotists on social media because I'm selling my trainings, and I don't have a lot of people in my local area interested in becoming hypnotists. So I feel like I need to sort of go out more broad on that. But as far as getting the local clients,
and I think that's true of at least three of you, maybe Evan too, but you're marketing on two levels, because you're marketing to the other hypnotists that you're selling the courses to and the classes to. But then if you're also doing the one-on-one sessions, then that's a whole different level of promotion, right? Evan, are you doing the same kind of thing?
I'm actually beefing up my social media more. And as somebody who I absolutely despise social media, I think it is harmful to society as a whole. But as
I have a love-hate relationship with it myself.
As a business owner, doesn't matter, because that's where the people are. Mm-hmm. That's where the eyeballs are. So, and you want to get your message in front of people. And Kaz is absolutely right. It's like, sell the issue, not hypnosis. And that was, I mean, I've made all these mistakes. I'm working back from those. At the start, I was very much wanted to be like community and get out. I'm very introverted. So it's like, that was okay. I need to actually go network with people and do things out and about. And then COVID hit, and that changed everything. And that changed the entire way I had to look at what I was doing with my business. And first there was a struggle because nobody wanted, I was forced to do online stuff, which I mean, I was fine with, but my clients weren't. So there was a few months
sometimes
where it was like, well, I want in person. It's like, well, yeah, I would love to. I can't right now. But then everybody wanted Zoom. And now it's like, yeah, people are comfortable with it and tend to prefer it. And that said, it's like, I have a decent office location and I have a sign out front, and I get a lot of clients just from that. Even that, like, most of my work I'm doing from home. I'm doing from home on Zoom. My office is my little getaway to go work on stuff by myself and quiet. And
business question along the same lines then. And let's start with Barry on this one. This is from David Quigley, actually. How do you hit clients who say it didn't work? Do you give them a refund?
If it didn't work,
and don't tell me that you've never had a client that said
no, not at all. No, if I have someone comes in and whatever I'm doing does not work, and I feel that whatever I do will not work, I will offer them a refund there and then. No question.
Full refund?
Full refund. No question.
What if you've done some work and maybe they have had some positive responses, but they're not enough, or they're not acknowledging that it's good, quite enough? Do you give a full refund or partial, or what's your...
So are we talking about multiple sessions at this point, or are we talking about in a session?
Yeah, like, do you ever have people that prepay for a package of like 3 sessions or 4 sessions or anything? No,
I don't. So, well, I start with 2 sessions. I always sell 2 sessions.
okay.
But if they come in that first session and for whatever reason, something's not right, I will offer them the full refund for both sessions.
And
without question. Because
Evan, how about you? Same for you?
I do packages, and I try to get payment up front, or at least a deposit down, and then finish payment in there. If somebody came in after one session, I mean, this is where the consultation is incredibly important, I think, because if I'm getting a funny vibe where this could be an issue with somebody, it's understanding where they are in their own change process. Is this something they really want? Or are they looking for an excuse to stay in the same patterns?
But you would get that through the phone call, right? Before the session.
Yeah. And that's where I would decide if I would work with them or not.
Sometimes they sneak past the video.
Yeah. And when they sneak past, I haven't had anybody ask, knock on wood, that keeps going. But if it was somebody that I could not work with, and I'm like, I would at least refund for the session work I hadn't done.
Right, the unused
at that point. But at the same time, it's like, when it comes to results, it's like, well, I view like the work is either complete or incomplete, and something will happen if they're resistant. If not, they're wasting everybody's time. Mm-hmm. And I've like, you're paying me to be your unconscious coach. I'm not doing anything to you. You're doing all the work. So it's trying to find a way to get the onus on the client for their change, and we're just facilitating it basically to avoid that.
Do you get your refund policy in? Because I know Stephanie does, because I've seen it, that you have a cut. I mean, I love that. It's like clear, it's dry, you sign off on it, bam, right?
Right. It's if they've had a session with me, no refunds. If they bought a package or something and feel like I need to refer them to someone else, it's not working out or whatever, I'll refund unused portions, but not if I've already spent my time with them. I just went to the dentist the other day because I've got some tooth pain, and he could not help me. He cannot find it. He cannot figure it out. It's not a cavity. He doesn't understand what's going on. Do you think I had to pay him?
Yeah, exactly.
You better believe it. Right. So I'm going to have to go to a different dentist and get another opinion, but I had to pay him for his time and his expertise.
Definitely.
Right.
And that's what they're paying for at the end of the day. So
I think there's a difference as well between can't work with somebody and something not working as well. So I think for the rare person that might slip through the cracks and then you realize that they're not a good fit, then they'll pay me for the time. I charge for consultation anyway. So they'll come in, and then at that point, I'll make that decision as to whether or not, they can decide whether they think I'm a good fit and vice versa. And, there are people that I don't think, it doesn't happen very often because they've been through some kind of vetting beforehand. But if I get somebody and we just don't get where we want to get to, I'll get to a point where I think I've done as much as I can, and then I'll tell them that. But I don't refund them because I've done as much as I can. I've given it my best shot in whatever way. And, and then, I know also where to draw the line and say, okay, I'm going to refer you on to somebody else, just as there's people that have been referred to me because of that. And they didn't, their psychotherapist or their doctor or their psychiatrist, however, didn't refund their money because they weren't able to help. So I think it depends on the circumstances. If I got a really sticky person who was just being really arsey and was demanding a refund for whatever reason, and we all get those people from time to time, sometimes I'd just rather have rid of them. It's only happened to me twice in 20 years, but for my sanity and the amount of time that they would then take sapping up that time, I've just given them a refund. But that's happened twice in 20 years, and both of them were 3 sessions or less. So sometimes it's about what serves me better. We're there to serve our clients, but sometimes I'm thinking what serves me better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's good mileage to that as well, because the way I see it is, if you do to them a bad job, they'll go out and tell 20 people. If you do a good job, they'll probably tell about 3. So if you do something and they're having an argument, they want their money back, just give them the money back. Because if you don't, you get into a fight with them, they're going to tell everybody.
I have kind of a funny anecdotal story about something like that, actually. There was a woman, it was in 2020. She snuck through my vetting process. We had the first couple of sessions. She had prepaid for a package of them. Then she started abusing the right to reach me. I'm available by email at any time, right? And then I'll just get back to you as soon as I can. Certainly text, but if I don't respond, it's because I'm in a session or whatever. But you can't just call me whenever. She started calling me not only like at all hours of the day and night, but also drunk.
Oh.
And so I had to just say, this isn't a good fit. This isn't working, boundary issues. I didn't mention that part, but to myself, I'm like, yeah, I got to stop this. So I did, and I refunded her the unused portion. And she went out and told all these people how awful I was, how expensive I was. She left negative reviews everywhere. Since that happened, I've actually gotten clients because of her, because she's so disliked. People were like, if she doesn't like you, you're probably a good person.
Yeah.
So I was like, that whole thing about there's no such thing as bad press, maybe in this case, just the fact that she is who she is and not very well liked, people assumed that if she had terrible things to say about me, maybe I'm actually a compassionate, helpful human being. So I thought that was kind of funny.
And something else I like to do to help avoid these issues too. And I mean, I look at it as just improving what I'm doing, but I'm like, no, this will help in those sorts of situations. At the start of every session, it's like, okay, what's our goal for today? And being very clear about that. And at the end, it's like asking for feedback, and don't be afraid, like on a scale 1 to 10, where would you say did we meet our goal for this session? And is there anything you particularly liked or didn't like? What would you like me to change?
Feedback is key.
And get that. And just by doing that, because you're listening to them, even if they have nothing bad to say, then it helps with the rapport, and it makes them probably less inclined to want to be like, well, this didn't work. You're a bad hypnotist, so give me my money back.
Right. Yeah, and they tend to be feeling pretty good right at the end of a session too. So not a bad time to say, hey, how you doing? Because then they're hearing themselves saying it, that's logging it into their memory. As they leave, they're thinking, oh, that was pretty good. I would love to open this up to question and answers now to anybody else who has questions. Oh, Stephanie has a question.
A question for Kaz.
Very cool.
Okay. And this just came up today, and I have not talked to this potential client yet. She's being referred to me from another therapist in my office building. But she's 29 years old. She has intimacy problems and vaginismus, and that she's pretty sure she knows when it started. When she was 11 years old, she was experimenting with masturbation. And then she found out that her stepfather was videotaping her secretly. So how would you handle it? So I'm awaiting her phone call, her phone consultation, but
okay. So
how would you handle that?
Okay, so back to the trans protocol. So vaginismus is when did she find out? Let me just check. The first question is she knows that he was taping her how old did you say she was? 11 years old?
Right.
Okay, and how old was she when she found that out?
I'm not sure because I haven't spoken with her yet. This was from another therapist that she's working with in my building.
So I would just check all of that first. That may be the cause of vaginismus, but vaginismus more often than not, certainly masturbation, it's normally about if any kind of sexual dysfunction that's caused by an issue with masturbation, it's usually about somebody catching them and then shaming them for it. And so first of all, it's kind of normalizing that. So that's that teach and educate part and that normalizing. Often with vaginismus, once you take away the shame and the guilt around vaginismus and around what that then means and around, usually with the younger self again, I tend to talk about the younger self rather than the inner child, because as soon as you say the word child and sex together in the same sentence, people start freaking out. So that's why I tend to do that, even though it's nothing to do, it's crazy, but there we go. So I would do some inner child work or younger self work where you go back with the adult self. I always go forwards first, get that resource state. It's just another version of the meta model, really, where you get that resource state and then we go back with that resource and then we coach the younger self through what's about to happen, how to cope with that, why she needed to be protected at that point, and then we put in that protection at that point. When it comes to then, sorry, go on. You want to say something?
Well, I was just wondering about are you associating them or keeping them dissociated at this point?
What I normally do is I have like a meeting between three of them. So we've got the present self, the future self, and the younger self. And then I normally kind of integrate them all back in together again. So we've got the younger self who's now hopefully feeling much more protected and safe. We've got the future self with all these resources all being integrated into the present self. So we've got new resource states and hopefully some resolution to whatever was going on in the past. I also educate and talk about how the muscles of the vagina, so it depends what she's had before. Often women that have got vaginismus have been to psychosexual counseling where they're given dilators, and they're given these dilators in increasing sizes. And the bit that they always seem to miss out is context. So again, it's this education where I say to women, look, most women, if they were just asked to randomly place an object inside their vaginal canal, it would be uncomfortable because it's out of context. So we have to make sure that it's in context. So if you're practicing with these dilators or a finger even, which I'll encourage them to do, obviously when they're at home, is because they're feeling safe, we need to elicit all of these other things like your eroticism to make sure this is happening in context. It's not about being able to shove something up there. So we're working on a physical level, that emotional level to deal with whatever it was that happened, but also getting their confidence back in their body, because vaginismus can be really devastating in that they often feel like they can't have relationships. Obviously, penetration, if it occurs, can be really, really painful. And stop them using things like tampons because we've got that clamping, which is very life limiting. And there's a whole lot of shame around that. So I would do that transformational piece, but also educate about, if they're then going to use things like dilators, is to really make friends with their vagina and their vulva again, which often they've got quite a dissociation. They've got quite a hate relationship between that part of their body.
From what I understand, she has intimacy issues as well with her husband.
There you go. If it hurts and you can't do it and you feel like you're a failure, what do? We avoid it, don't we? It can almost become a phobic type response. So, and that's about being able to, be intimate in a safe way. So she need, obviously, if you find that you've been intimate just by yourself and it turned out that safe place was violated by somebody that was supposed to be taking care of you, you can see how it maybe he was using that to shame her as well. The person that was videotaping her. And also part of that trance protocol, that C, is communication and connection. So it's about how to communicate with yourself, but also how to communicate with a partner so that her yeses and nos are very strong, so that she can ask for what she needs and stop it. Because the thing is, if you think something's going to hurt, you avoid it, you know. And interestingly, people that have vaginismus usually don't have arousal issues. So they usually would seem to be, on the face of it, wet and ready and primed, but it's this kind of this clamping. So it's not normally an arousal problem or a desire problem either. It's just normally this fear of
just like a protection, like,
yeah.
Okay.
And it's muscular at that point. Like it's a.
Well, it is partly muscular, you know. It's a response, you know. But this is why we need to kind of we need to do both. We need to have the psychological thing, and we also need to help them with the muscular thing.
Right.
But what tends to happen in psychosexual therapy is they focus on the muscular thing, and it's almost, they'll say, I mean, some of the stories I've heard from women with vaginismus being given numbing cream. I mean, how barbaric is that, to try and have sex? You're given numbing cream, so not only can't you can't feel anything, but you've also got this fear of pain. One of the other things is, as I say, dilators, but they don't talk about it in terms of it being in context. And that's actually the key to successful use of dilators, is that women understand the context in which they need to be using them.
Meaning in a safe place, meaning
in a safe place where there's arousal present, where they're feeling receptive.
As opposed to like clinical, medical.
Yeah. You know,
Gotcha.
Otherwise it's a bit like having a pap smear or something, you know. We're not feeling sexy at that point usually, are we, you know?
No.
And also
as the men in the group are just staring straight ahead.
and to kind of to feel those. So sometimes I'll do something called, it's actually based on, I stole, borrowed, although I always say this, I guess I've not stolen it, I always credit it. There is something called gut directed hypnosis, which was very much working with the smooth muscle of the intestine and the peristaltic movement that moves food through the gut. And we actually have the same kind of muscle in the vaginal canal, which is how babies can be born without anything happening. So we can actually influence the movement of that muscle with the mind. So once I kind of explain to them, and I tell them, we've got this really amazing muscle that's in our body that moves, you know, all this food through your gut, and we have the same muscle in the vaginal canal that can be responsive and opening. So I actually get them to do one muscle at a time, and they actually do feel, when they're using the dilators, this muscle will go, then this muscle will open, then this muscle, and they get higher and higher and higher each time. But then they're feeling in control of that, which is why I do encourage them to experiment and explore alone, because if they feel comfortable with their own fingers, their own dilators, a toy, whatever it may be, then it's much easier for them to communicate that with a partner without feeling like they're going to fail or their partner's going to be disappointed. It's interestingly, one of the biggest reasons women come to see me about sexual problems is because it's upsetting their partner.
Yeah, I could see that.
So would that still work? I mean, I'm looking at it in the context of, you know, if somebody's coming to you to quit a bad habit, for example, but they don't really want to, it's their partner or their doctor or somebody else that's telling them to. If they're not at threshold, does the same sort of thing happen with you, where the woman is coming to you, but it's not really her that?
Well, often it is, but they've lost hope. So they're kind of thinking, right, I need to sort this out, or my marriage is going to end.
Oh,
or my
okay. So
relationship
the marriage is at
going
threshold
to
in your
end.
mind. Gotcha.
Or, you know, or my partner says that it's affecting his self-esteem because I can't orgasm or whatever it may be. And I do hear that on a really regular basis.
Yeah.
And this is when I just sit them down and I say, you know, and this is where I go back to this teach and educate. And I'm like, do you know that your body, the female body, is primed for pleasure? You know, we were saying till recently that 8,000 nerve endings on, you know, on the old clitoris, but actually we now know there's a lot more than that. And, you know, they finally did the proper research. I forget
I love that you have a clitoris right there as like a paper.
Always.
I'm going to give her a copy of your book.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Kaz? What is that? What is that you're talking about?
It was a clitoris.
I don't know.
Don't worry, Barry, you might not be able to see it.
What?
So,
Never heard of it.
But,
You're like, hey, where'd you find that?
But it's
Looking for that for a while, Evan, huh?
Absolutely.
Men
Been looking
can't
all your
find it
life.
even when it's right in front of their face. So,
But and I have that conversation because many women have, and men actually have, so much shame around their sexuality. Often that first session is a lot of talking rather than hypnosis, where essentially I give them permission to give themselves permission that they can enjoy sex, that they can be interested in sex, that they can want it for themselves, for their pleasure, and then share that with a partner. And that's a massive shift, because then it becomes about their pleasure and their function. And sometimes with vaginismus, people want to be a mum. And if you can't be penetrated easily, that makes it really difficult. So, or it might be that they just want to have sex, so it depends on, but often we can usually switch it. So it's about their pleasure and their want and need, because often they're so shut down that they don't even know that they're a sexual being. And most people are. Occasionally I get people who are looking to find out, am I just asexual? Or is it that I've just got no libido? And sometimes it turns out they are quite asexual, and it's more connection and intimacy that's their thing rather than sexual. Just depends. So, but yeah, sorry, I'm hugging the floor, so I'll be quiet.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kaz.
Yeah,
You're very welcome, always.
You as one of the guest hosts in the spotlight chair one of these times, where it's just you. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Barry, do you have anything that you would like to share that might have come up over the course of the last little bit before we end the call? And I'm going to ask you as well, Evan and Stephanie.
Yeah, the one thing that's been bugging me is looking at Evan's backdrop, and I'm thinking, what a wonderful apartment he's got. And then I suddenly realize it's the backdrop from Frasier.
Yeah, it's Frasier. And
I mean, wow,
everything looks so perfect except for that chair. Wait a minute.
What's that chair?
I didn't realize that till just now. That's so funny.
Good eye, Barry. Evan, did you want to chime in with anything?
Thanks for having me. This has been great, and especially with these three luminaries that get to share this time with. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm so tickled that all four of you could make it. Thank you so very much. Stephanie, is there anything you wanted to share?
Likewise, I just echo Evan's sentiments. Just thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to all of you. And to everybody in the group, if you find these live events helpful, informative, or at least entertaining, please consider donating a couple of notes of appreciation, as Lori Hammond would say. I will pop a link actually in the group feed, not here, so that you can do that if you want. It's not at all mandatory. These will always be free. It would just be to help offset the behind the scenes organization and, pulling together everything to help with that. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Kaz, it was a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. Barry, I always love having you on, even though I don't always agree with you. Stephanie.
That's how we learn from each other.
That's how we learn. What I love about our discourse, though, Barry, is that we do it respectfully. We disagree, but we still can do it respectfully.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think that's something that's kind of a lost art in modern society. So
sure.
So thank you for being the burr in my side sometimes. Stephanie, love you to pieces, as you know. And the reason why you're here, my dear, is because you did such a fantastic job with the guest spotlight 2 weeks ago that I got tons of people requesting, when is Stephanie going to come back? And I was like, well, maybe we'll just have her back in 2 weeks. So,
thank you, guys.
Yeah. And Evan, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. And I may have a client for you, actually. So I'm going to reach out to you here after this. So pretty soon.
Great.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week and see you in a couple weeks.
Great. Bye now.